The purpose of this series is to pose a critical analysis of the socioeconomic model proposed by progressives such as Jimmy Dore, Kyle Kulinski, David Pakman, Cenk Uygur, and the rest of the talking heads associated with the Young Turks. I don't believe it's a secret that the United States is a decaying imperialist state. While we are still on top right now, holding military presence in countries around the globe, with the dollar being the world's reserve currency, the thing that the empire has had to have done to maintain its hegemony continues to grow more severe and exploitative over time. Since the passing of neoliberal trade deals starting in the 1970s, Americans haven't seen a meaningful wage increase in decades as productivity is at an all-time high, and yet wages have fallen flat. In addition, there is a massive credit crisis where the public is shackled by trillions of dollars of consumer debt, student loan debt, medical bills, as a consequence from the stagnant wages and the rising costs of price inelastic goods. We are no longer number one, as our Human Development Index slips another rank relative to other countries. And so the American people look to Nordic Europe, where they have the free college, the healthcare, the legal weed, the infrastructure spending, market regulations, and so on. They see that these people are less stressed out about bills, are happier, healthier, have cleaner ecology, and a more stable economy, and they want to emulate that, and understandably so. This is where you get progressive Democrats like Bernie Sanders, Ro Khanna, Tulsi Gabbard, Ilhan Omar, AOC, who reject corporate PAC money out of principle, promising to bring the jobs back, end the imperialism, fight climate change, and give everyone good-paying green jobs in the process. This is what socialism means in the 21st century, after all. It's when the government does some stuff, while communism is when government does all of this stuff. Sarcasm aside, what these politicians are actually fighting for is social democracy, which is still capitalism. You see, capitalism has nothing to do with the state's involvement in the economy and everything to do with who controls the means of production. And in social democracy, the means of production are still privately owned and controlled. They just have a strengthened social safety net and tighter regulations on the market to combat negative externalities as a byproduct of capitalism. What American progressives and liberals are not computing when they advocate for these things is how utopian their worldview is. It's the idea that the working class and the capitalist class, two groups that have been at odds with one another, can live in harmony. That all we need to do is make the capitalists share some of their wealth with the workers, and everything will be okay. We can just regulate away the negative externalities pandemic to the system, and class antagonisms will magically end. We can all hold hands, sing Kumbaya, Lord, Kumbaya. No. As we have established, this system is still capitalism. There's still a capitalist class, there's still a working class. Allow me to give you a basic lesson in dialectics. The interests of the capitalists are to maximize profits, which is directly tied to the rate of exploitation. The more you can get away with paying your employees less, stiffing them of their workers' benefits, tailoring, union busting, mothballing factories, investigating a more sophisticated technology, dodging fees for damage done to the environment, outsourcing, bribing politicians to pass laws that work in your favor, oftentimes at the expense of others. The more capital you can secure and either pocket or reinvest to grow your business. Conversely, the interest of the working class is to maximize wages and benefits while minimizing effort and hours worked. The more you get paid, the easier the work, the greater the benefits, the more paid time off, the cleaner the environment, the more money you have to pay your bills, the more time you have for leisure, the better your health and by extension your quality of life. However, in order for workers to have those benefits and securities, it requires that they tap into the capitalists' profit margins, and the capitalists definitely don't want that. This is why there has been an almost 2-century-long struggle between workers and owners. Workers form unions, go on general strike, sabotage machinery, while owners hire armed thugs, aka the police, to beat them down. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this antagonism doesn't magically go away in social democracy. The classes are still at odds with one another, but now the capitalists have to pay substantially more in taxes to fund the free healthcare, the college, the expensive infrastructure projects, none of which particularly profits them. And at this stage, where these corporations have as much wealth centralized and concentrated as they do, as their profit margins continue to flee more and more by the decade, they continue to become even more driven to cut security, atomize, alienate, and exploit workers even more and more. Remember when I mentioned the neoliberal trade deals being passed earlier? Well, this comes into play here. These trade deals did not get passed in a vacuum. Neoliberalism didn't just happen because capitalists want to make more money. There was a very real necessity to preserve the capitalist system. Due to this very pressure, this propensity for the rate of profit to fall, large corporate conglomerates were driven to flee the United States and journey abroad to countries like Indonesia, China, India, or Mexico, where the wages are substantially lower than what they are in the United States. The wages of American workers grew too much for businesses to sustain during the 1960s and 70s, and since they can't roll the clocks back on those concessions without backlash from the public, on top of the propensity for the rate of profit to fall, they had no choice but to do this. In other words, neoliberalism saved capitalism. If the trade deals didn't happen, if neoliberalism didn't happen, then the 1980s would have ended in another Great Depression resembling that of the 1930s. This reasoning becomes twofold after you also factor in the greed as well. After all, why pay an American worker $30 an hour when you can pay someone in Mexico $3 an hour? It's a win-win for everybody. Well, except for the workers, anyway. So even if you do get some concessions from the capitalist class, at some point they are going to fight to wither away at those gains for workers. In 2008, when the global economy took a big hit, conditions have been met for reactionaries to take power, and granted that they don't remove these programs outright, what they do is instead implement budget cuts to chip away at them, making these programs less efficient, in which during their next election cycle they will use as a justification to propose even more budget cuts. After all, look at how inefficient the government does it. As we speak, virtually every country in Europe is in austerity. That's right, countries all across the EU are doing budget cuts to their social programs in response to the financial crisis of 2008. Here's a list of some of the austerity measures being imposed in some of these countries.
Denmark. Government will cut spending by $4 billion over the next 3 years to lower budget deficits to below 3% of GDP. Spending cuts include unemployment benefits lowered to 2 years from 4. The public sector will lose 20,000 jobs, child benefits are to be reduced by 5%, ministerial salaries cut by 5%, and university expenses will be cut. France. The government budget aims at lowering the deficit to 6% of GDP in 2011, 3% in 2013, and 2% in 2014. Parliament voted to raise the retirement age to 62 from 60. The pay-as-you-go pension system is being raised by half a year to 41.5 years of required work for full pension. A 3-year freeze on public spending is under consideration. Pension contributions from employees' pay will rise to 10.55% from 7.85%. Income taxes for the highest income group will rise by 1%, and one-off corporation tax break will be eliminated. Under these plans, a total of $45 billion a year will be cut from government spending over the next 3 years. Germany. The budget before Parliament by end of November will cut the budget deficit by $80 billion, 3% of GDP by 2014. The government will cut welfare spending by $30 billion over a 4-year period, reduce public sector payrolls by up to $15,000 by 2014, and raise new taxes on nuclear power plant operators and air travel. Defense cuts include reducing armed services by 40,000 troops in an effort to cut military spending by $9.3 billion. UK. The British government unveiled the country's steepest public spending cuts in more than 60 years, $83 billion in spending cuts by 2015, bringing 11% of the GDP budget deficit down 1% over the next 5 years. The new budget cuts reducing costs in government department by an average of 19% to 24% cut to the Department of Culture, raising the retirement age from 65 to 66 by 2020, eliminating 490,000 public sector jobs over the next 4 years, university cuts, lowering long-term unemployment benefits from 95% to 70%, and eliminating benefits to those who do not seek jobs. eliminating child benefits to those earning more than $70K, as well as other cuts to the welfare system. Defense spending will decrease by 8% and police spending will decrease by 4%. The VAT tax will rise from 17.5% to 20% in January. Netherlands. The Netherlands austerity plan aims to cut the budget by $18 billion by 2015. Likely measures will include higher retirement age, reduced military spending, tax increases, and cuts in government programs.
What this means is at this stage is that capital can't even tolerate social democracy anymore. In order for big business to preserve themselves, they have to privatize the gains and socialize the losses as much as they can. This is not me sympathizing with the bourgeoisie, by the way. Capital literally makes them have to do this. The only way for this system to keep running is to find further and further avenues of exploitation as big business is driven to secure fleeting profit margins the larger and more centralized that they grow. We are at a point where many corporations actually net receive money from the government in the form of subsidies, also known as corporate welfare. So I have a suggestion. How about instead of trying to maintain the system as is and try to force it to be a friendly version of itself, we actually switch economic modes entirely? As I have stated earlier, social democracy does nothing to resolve the contradiction between wage labor and capital. The reason why the trade unions are all gone, why our manufacturing base has traveled abroad, why we constantly have to bail out finance capital during depressions, and why our government is always operating on the basis of budget cuts, is because the state works on behalf of the capitalist class. And for every dollar that they have to pay out to these concessions that they granted yesteryear, it takes away from their profit margins of today. So the only way that this contradiction can be resolved is if we don't even have a capitalist class in the first place. It's if these corporate conglomerates are transformed into collectives that are democratically controlled by the workers themselves. In other words, overturn these institutions to the workers and implement a centrally planned socialist economy. They aren't superhuman. They don't have a magic bloodline. Literally every function fulfilled by a capitalist can be done by the workers. And there's no reason why that function should be so heavily, disproportionately, mind-bogglingly rewarded with incomprehensible amounts of wealth compared to the grunts on the bottom who are the ones generating all the value. It's workers that make the world go around. They pave the roads, build the houses, manufacture use values, unclog the toilets, and heal you when you're sick. And it is the workers, the ones who contribute the most, who should be the ones democratically deciding what is done with society's resources. This has been Leninist Rules. I'm Comrade Xander. Peace out.